drunk dad yelled, "Take her!" But what the gunslinger revealed next was incredibly touching. As laughter echoed through the dim-lit bar and the golden glow of the hanging lights illuminated faces familiar to him, Jake felt a heaviness creep into his chest. It was supposed to be a night of celebration for his friend, but there was an electric charge in the air, a disturbance that felt like a warning. He glanced around at the patrons, their smiles now shadowed by a sense of impending chaos. Then it happened. The shout that rippled through the laughter, slicing through the camaraderie like a knife. "Take her!" Tom's voice rang out, raw and desperate, drawing every eye in the room. In that instant, Jake's heart raced. Fearful blue eyes locked onto his. Lily, just 16, standing small against her father's volatile presence. Memories surged from his own past, flooded with anguish and unresolved emotions. He saw in her the echo of his younger self, anchored in a sea of familial turmoil. The years spent in the courtroom, navigating his father's demons, grappling with his own ghosts. Jake's palms grew clammy as he weighed his options, intervene or stand by. The pressure quickened, filling his mind with a rushing tide of despair and determination. Breathing irregularly, he approached Tom, feeling the eyes of the bar boring into him like stakes driven into the ground. Could he really confront a man who had once been a hero? "Tom," he started, his voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos unfolding. "You need to listen. Lily needs you. She needs her father back." The words hung in the air, charged with an unsettling mix of hope and doubt. Would Tom hear him? Would he break through the fog of resentment and despair? Jake's inner monologue churned. What if he pushed too hard? What if Tom lashed out? He had seen a father's wrath all too intimately. It was a connection he wished to sever entirely. Yet here he stood, caught between those memories and the responsibility to protect Lily, a responsibility that blackmailed his conscience with guilt. The silence weighed heavily, enriched by the reflections in the bar's smoky mirrors. As Tom's eyes narrowed, Jake's heart sank further. He thought of his own father's disappointment. He thought of how anger could fracture lives, how being caught in the crossfire could leave a child lost forever. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's words were a tether, hoping to rein in Tom's rage, while his insides twisted in knots. He could see it in Tom's body language, the struggle within him, the battle between love and anger. "You were once a great father, remember that." Jake pressed on, dredging up memories that fought for release, hoping to find a chink in the armor of Tom's discontent. Would Tom recognize the man he had been? Or would he remain lost in his own anguish? A flicker of awareness passed through Tom's expression, but it was quickly shrouded again by shadows, uncertainty tightening the knot in Jake's stomach. As the weight of the moment clawed at his resolve, Jake stood firm, prepared for whatever might come next. "You can still be whatever you want, Tom," he murmured. But the moment hung precariously, each second stretching into eternity, a painful standoff between the tangles of past and the urgency of the present. Would they break the cycle tonight? Or was this just another chapter in the stories they feared to rewrite? The culmination of pain, anger, and love awaited resolution. But the night had just begun. Jake's words hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting hope to despair. He could feel every heartbeat intensifying the silence between him and Tom, as though the very air shifted, teetering on the brink. In that fleeting moment, memories swirled in Jake's mind, haunting him. He remembered the last time he had faced his father, a confrontation that had changed everything. It was as if he had been trapped in a mirror reflecting Tom's rage, but also a chance for redemption. "Tom," he urged, taking a tentative step closer. "This isn't just about you. Lily needs to know that you still care. She needs a father." The desperation clawed at his throat, and he resisted the urge to reach out, to physically break through the walls that had formed over years of neglect and anger. Tom's eyes shifted, flickering with doubt. For a brief instant the fierceness dimmed, revealing a glimpse of the father Jake knew he had once been. But then the darkness returned, and it consumed that flicker, leaving only resignation behind. "What do you know about being a father?" he spat, venom lacing his words. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Each word struck like shrapnel, igniting a profound determination in Jake. He had long ago learned to navigate through pain, to channel it. "I know more than you think. I've seen the consequences of choices left unmade. If you don't try now, you might lose her forever." Seeing the conflicted storm within Tom pushed Jake into a relentless urgency. This wasn't simply about the chaos of that moment. It was an embodiment of years of unresolved issues. He had endured a lot, masking wounds behind a facade of strength, but an idea began to formulate. Perhaps this was his moment to take a stand, not just for Lily, but for himself. The confrontation with Tom had invoked something rare in him, a sense of purpose that had remained dormant for too long. "How do I fix this?" Tom's voice cracked, the weight of the world evident in his tone. "I don't even know where to begin." Jake paused, allowing Tom's vulnerability to seep into his perception of the moment. He recognized that, beneath the anger and the alcohol, lay a man suffocating under the pressure of his own brokenness. "Start with honesty. Talk to her. Show her you care. Actions speak louder than words." Even as Tom's expression wavered, Jake felt a flicker of fear. Was he pushing too far? Would he lose the fragile connection that was just beginning to form? He thought of the moment he had decided to change his course in life, to step out from his father's shadow. That choice had been painful yet necessary, and now he was asking Tom to do the same. "I wish I could," Tom shot back, the fire faltering. "But I don't know how. I don't deserve her." "But you do," Jake countered firmly, reaching for the deeper truth buried beneath the layers of self-loathing. "You deserve a chance to be better. We all do. It starts with confronting our demons." The bartender watched with keen interest as the energy in the bar shifted, patrons chuckling softly, their drinking momentarily paused. The air felt denser now, heavy with anticipation. The wool of the entire situation pulled taut, waiting for the unraveling. Before Jake could speak again, a shout erupted from across the bar, a reminder that chaos wasn't finished with them yet. He turned sharply, instincts heightened, and watched as a group of rowdy patrons burst through the door, laughter shifting to anger. Jake's instincts kicked in. This was where he had to fight not just for Lily but for the chance to guide Tom away from this spiraling descent. "Stay here," he commanded, locking eyes with Tom. "Right here. Don't run." As he stepped away, the horror of uncertainty nestled in his gut. He knew that each moment counted and every decision mattered. Whether he was ready or not, the upcoming confrontation would set the stage for the choices they all needed to make, not only for themselves, but for each other. The chaos surged forward, and with that unfolding storm, a new layer of self-discovery knitted together in Jake's mind. What would he discover about himself in the coming moments? The answer awaited just around the corner, as the night promised an escalation he could never have anticipated. Jake moved through the bar, his senses heightened, each step thick with resolve. The raucous shouts behind him ebbed, but the weight of unfinished business lingered like fog. He maneuvered around tables and patrons caught in a haze of revelry, aware that he was poised on a delicate precipice, one foot teetering between hope and despair. As voices amplified, the chaotic energy pulsed through him. The tavern's lively atmosphere contrasted sharply with the whirlwind in his mind. A piece of him wanted to retreat, to let the tumult of confrontation unfold without him. But that part of him had dwindled, replaced by the fierce need for action. He was no longer willing to step back from conflict. "Hey, get the hell out!" The voice sliced through the noise, drawing his focus. A brawl erupted at the bar's far end, a careless slip igniting pent-up aggression among drunken patrons. Jake's heart raced as instincts kicked in. He wanted to intervene, not only to protect himself but also for Tom. If he didn't steer this chaos, what hope did Tom have? Yet even as he prepared to step in, doubts stirred restlessly. He questioned his ability to handle the situation, his judgment wavering under the weight of so many past failures. "Jake!" The distressed shout of a man drowning in folly snapped him from contemplation. He turned to see a familiar face, Captain Harris, a former colleague from his time in law enforcement. He'd always respected Harris's unwavering commitment, the sort of resilience that Jake had often admired from afar yet rarely aspired to match. "Let's settle this," Harris called, striding towards the core of the chaos with a presence that demanded attention. Jake followed, feeling a flicker of admiration. As Harris deftly navigated the hostile energy, Jake found himself reflecting on his own journey. He had turned from the paths of anger and trepidation, seeking a version of himself that embodied strength through vulnerability rather than aggression. Would he ever fully embrace this new role? As he approached, he resolved to mirror the captain's bravery, to find depth in his assertiveness. With a decisive step, he placed himself beside Harris. "Let's defuse this now," he declared. His voice cut through the belligerence like a life buoy amidst a tempest. Patrons turned, eyes narrowed, but curiosity flickered beneath their rage. Harris nodded, seeming to appreciate Jake's willingness to stand firm. Together they faced the seething crowd, an unlikely duo set against a chorus of disorder. Jake's heart thudded in his chest. He could feel his fear morphing into something powerful, a burgeoning determination that resonated through his bones. The sense of being in control heightened his awareness. "Understand this. Your words can hurt, but your choices define you." Jake addressed the throng, channeling the raw emotion that surged through him. The crowd's noise faltered momentarily, intrigued by this unfamiliar confrontation to chaos. As seemingly insurmountable as the situation felt, Jake realized these moments were flashes of discovery. He was evolving, no longer a child merely seeking validation from a lost father. He was a man, ready to carve his own path and defy the ripple effects of generational abandonment. But then he caught a glimpse of Tom at the edge of the crowd, his expression a mosaic of fear and longing. There was hesitation painted across his features. Tom wanted to engage, but was caught within the web of his own trepidation. "Tom," Jake called out, his voice slicing deeper than the noise. "This is your chance. Don't be a ghost in your daughter's life. Be there for her." The face-off held its grip, Tom's eyes locking momentarily with Jake's. In that split second, Jake recognized the truth. The way forward was both a gift and a burden, fraught with unknowns. Jake advanced further into the chaos, his pulse quickening as he laid bare his own revelations. The inner conflict seethed, igniting his mantra. Change only follows our bravest decisions. Yet beneath it lurked a haunting question. Would Tom recognize his opportunity for redemption before it slipped away? The response hung in the air as the scene pressed forward. Where would the shadows of this gathering chaos lead them next? Jake prepared for the imminent unraveling, craving both clarity and confrontation. The eruption of conflict cascaded through the bar, the entangled emotions of frustration and fear swelling as patrons locked eyes on Jake. The tension crackled like electricity, igniting a distant memory, an echo from his childhood, where lost opportunities lingered like faded photographs. In that moment, Jake realized that the scattered pieces of his past sharpened his resolve, directing him firmly towards this tumultuous present. "Listen up," he boomed, channeling the fierce energy radiating from Harris, feeling less a spectator and more an integral part of this drama. It was a test, not just of courage, but of character. He stepped forward, deliberately, each stride echoing his resolve to reconsider who he was amid the chaos. He was not merely an observer of others' choices anymore. He was here, engaged, and ready to make his mark. The crowd paused, caught in the balance between aggression and curiosity. Jake seized the moment. "This isn't just about pride or ego anymore," he declared. "This is about being a man, standing firm when it matters. It's time to choose. Will you keep fighting or start finding solutions?" His words resonated. He could see the flicker of hesitation in the eyes of men who had likely seen too many fights fueled by regret and desperation. Would they rally against change, or embrace it? Tom's face hung in the periphery of his thoughts like an unsteady anchor, reminding him that this confrontation wasn't merely about the raucous crowd, but about an individual battle for redemption. Harris motioned for Jake to step back slightly, creating a moment for them to recalibrate their approach. "You have a knack for this, Jake," he noted, though his voice remained low, almost protective. Jake felt a swell of pride at the acknowledgement. Maybe he wasn't just imitating strength but discovering a forgotten layer of himself. "Tom!" he roared again, this time with urgency. "This is your moment. You want better for your daughter, don't you? Choose this moment to change." His heart buried deep in his throat, hoping this challenge wouldn't just resonate with Tom, but inspire him to step into the light. Time dilated. The chaotic laughter and anger of the crowd receded as Tom's face shifted from tension to contemplation. Jake could see it, the struggle within him, a desire to break free from the shackles of his past interwoven with a paralyzing fear of failure. As Tom wrestled with his demons, the other patrons began to sense the potential shift. Then it hit Jake like a tidal wave. This was more than just Joe's chance at redemption. It was an opportunity for every man in this bar who had found themselves trapped in cycles of regret. They were all complicit in their own narrative, a brilliant but tragic realization that each soul had the ability to redefine their fate. In one decisive moment, Tom took a step forward. The tremor in his expression told the story of a man in the throes of clash and contemplation. Jake held his breath, wondering if they were ready to break the chains of abandon. But just as Tom's lips began to part, a loud crash interrupted the moment. A bar stool toppled near the entrance, and chaos surged back to life. The crowd erupted into a frenzy again, and it was as if the universe conspired to snatch victory from their grasp. Jake's heart pounded like thunder. The stakes had shifted once more. "Harris, we have to take control again," he shouted, adrenaline flooding his veins as the seething chaos loomed, threatening to swallow all progress. With the same coin of hope and dread spinning in his heart, Jake knew the moment was now or never. This unpredictable maelstrom was a crucible for growth, a refining fire. Engaging with uncertainty had become an unwelcome but necessary companion. The ruckus grew louder as arguments reignited, obscuring Tom's figure. Jake had to act quickly, for this opportunity was fragile. "Everyone stop fighting," he yelled, fueled by an urgency to capture the newfound momentum. Through the din, he glimpsed something shifting within Tom, an inkling of resolve sprouting against the tides of adversity. Would it flourish, or falter under pressure? As the crowd reacted, Jake braced for the collision of potential and chaos, acutely aware that their fates hung in a delicate balance, teetering on the edge of transformation. Amid the rising tide of noise, Jake's resolve crystallized. He forced himself to push beyond the initial wave of panic. He could still see Tom, the shadow of a man wrestling with a history he was all too familiar with. The urgency to clarify the message overtook him, igniting another spark of inspiration deep within. He stepped back into the fray, positioning himself between the chaos and the uncertain souls that surrounded him. With each deliberate movement, he felt the familiar echo of his childhood creeping in, that latent fear of standing out, of making the wrong move. Yet here, in the cacophony of indecision and rage, he forced that kid back into the recesses of memory, summoning the strength that he had only recently begun to recognize. "Look around you," he bellowed, straining to project his voice above the din. He wasn't merely trying to thwart the physical confrontation. He aimed to shake loose the emotional storm brewing inside these men. "Fear has brought us here, but fear doesn't have to define us. What do you want your legacy to be?" The phrase hung in the air, a trembling leaf desperate for a fall. Jake noticed some of the faces beginning to soften, doubt etching paths across hardened expressions. He seized upon that glimmer of hope, letting vulnerability and strength intertwine in his next challenge. "What if we chose connection over conflict? Your children need to see strength as love, not anger." Amid the tumult, there was a flicker of recognition on Tom's face, a flash of understanding. Jake's heart pounded. He had thrown an anchor into tumult, one not just for Tom, but for every man inside, for a chance to confront their own missteps. Then, with an unexpected calm, Jake felt the change ripple through the crowd. It was as though the tumult of emotions that once fueled a reckless frenzy had started to weave a tapestry of accountability and courage. But he knew that the next step was crucial. He had to keep the momentum without fanning the flames of discontent. Jake caught Harris's eye. There was urgency now. They needed to reinforce the message. This is your moment too, Harris. Tell them what it's like to be on the brink of losing everything, and how you chose to fight for your dreams instead. With a steady breath, Harris stepped forward, his normally jovial facade replaced by an intense gaze born from sharing scars. I know what it's like to be broken by choices. Every one of us here has a story. We don't have to repeat the past. You can change paths, it's not too late. His voice resonated with truth, the unequivocal echo of a man who found strength through vulnerability. As sparks of connection began to ignite within the crowd, Jake drew closer to Tom, his focus tightening. You're not alone, brother. You have the chance to build a future for your daughter that's filled with love and hope. Take that step. Yet Tom halted, wavering as his entire essence clung to the familiar weight of fear. Jake took the risk of reaching out, resting a hand upon his shoulder, a gesture both firm yet reassuring. Would this man take the leap? But just as the crowd began to calm, the resounding shatter of glass pierced through the air, originating from deep in the bar. It cascaded over their moment like an unexpected thunderstorm, breaking into an intimate gathering, splintering their evolving unity. Jake's hand dropped from Tom's shoulder, tension snapping taut once more. In that fractious instant, Jake knew it wasn't just about the fight. It was about stepping into the unknown, about owning his part in the chaos unfolding, not just in the bar, but in life. Would they drown in the flood of fear yet again? Or could they rally, redefine their futures? As adrenaline pulsed through him, Jake steadied himself to confront the challenge anew, heart racing with both fear and fierce determination. But just as he prepared to re-engage, the crowd erupted. Not out of anger this time, but shock. They huddled together, startled as they realized the gravity of their shared moment had the power to shift their destinies. What lay ahead, Jake couldn't yet fathom. But as he looked once more at the swirling sea of emotions, he steeled himself. For something awaited. Something transformative was brewing, and he was simply at the cusp of it all. Whatever this new chaos entailed, it felt like the precipice of a revelation. With determination coursing through him, Jake prepared for whatever reckoning awaited. His identity, his purpose, everything lay unfurling in the hands of destiny. What had he not yet discovered about himself in this storm? The shattering glass echoed like a gunshot, more jarring than Jake could have anticipated. As the crowd tensed up, energy ebbed from the collective moment they had begun to cultivate. The tension hung thick as the shards glimmered in the fading light, an unspoken threat looming over their heads. Jake's heart raced, a visceral response to the sudden shift in the atmosphere. This was it. The crucible of change was upon them, ready to either forge connections or fracture them completely. Stay calm, everyone, Jake implored, forcing stability into his voice despite his own rising anxiety. Yet he recognized an uncomfortable truth lurking behind his declaration. He was no more immune than they were to fear's suffocating grip. He glanced toward Tom, who seemed frozen in place, his face a canvas of imperfection, caught between resolve and reluctance. With a heavy heart, Jake pondered if he had merely exchanged one form of chaos for another. Had his attempts to incite courage been misplaced? When you plead for authenticity, how often do you push others closer to the very brink they fear? The voices in his mind clamored for clarity. There was a question forming, vexing, and persistent. What lay beneath their bravado? Who were these men behind the masks they wore? In that moment of self-doubt, Jake noticed a man in the back, fingers twitching, eyes darting. Around his waist hung an unmistakable bulge, an outline of something too familiar. Fire surged in Jake's veins. The scene had escalated from an emotional standoff to something potentially explosive. He could no longer maintain the illusion of safety. Drawing from a place he didn't know existed, Jake stepped forward through the shifting crowd. You, he addressed the man, feeling a surge of determination. Whatever's happening in your life, It doesn't have to end in violence. Put it down. His voice seemed to take on its own energy, vibrating with a harsh clarity that sliced through the growing dread. The man hesitated, the glint of what might be a weapon wavering in his grip. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. This was no longer about Tom, nor the camaraderie he'd aimed to cultivate. It was a raw confrontation with primal fears. Every man there bore an internal struggle, each grappling with their own demons. Which ones would choose to lash out and which would allow themselves to be reached, confronted with the tenderness of vulnerability? Don't let the darkness suffocate your light, Jake continued, sensing the potential flickers within the crowd. Fear doesn't have to control you. Even as he presented his truth, Jake confronted his own internal turmoil. Did he truly believe that? The question gnawed at him, compelling him to follow through. The clarity that had brought him here felt chipped and fragile, yet it also firmly nestled the cornerstone of his belief. A belief that shifted him, opened a path where none existed. As chaos simmered at the surface, Tom remained at the epicenter, eyes locked on the man's twitching hand. Jake knew if they could shift their gaze toward the pain that lay beneath, they could find a way to connect. Look around, he enjoined once more, this time with more urgency. We're all fighting our battles. No one needs to face this alone. Time seemed to stretch as he awaited their reaction. The gravity of his words took root, grasping even the man with the weapon as a slight trembling overtook him. A remarkable thing happened. He began to release his hold, slowly lowering his hand as something stirred within him almost reluctantly. The tension in the air shifted, the crowd muttering amongst themselves. Tentatively, hope began to spark. But just as swiftly another voice erupted from the back, a shout dripping with bitterness. You don't know what it's like. You don't know us. That voice dripped with disdain, and Jake felt the shadow of doubt envelop his heart again. The very fear he sought to dissipate was now threatening to rise anew. Jake's breath quickened. How could he break through the barriers that loomed? In that moment he realized that this wasn't just a fight against uncertainty. It was an intricate dance, one that spoke to each individual's struggle, their histories bound in fear, anger, and hope. The heat of the moment grew palpable, holding the unmistakable scent of change in the air. Whatever awaited them was yet to be discovered. As Jake refocused his energy, he recognized the importance of vulnerability, not merely for himself, but for each person in that room standing at a crossroad of transformation. But would they all muster the courage to shed their masks and reveal the despair buried in their souls? He knew the moment of awakening had come, but it was just the beginning. In the crescendo of human experience, the question lurked: who would be brave enough to break the silence that weighed heavily upon them? Jake stood starkly aware of the chaotic energy that surrounded him, the tension crackling like electricity. He could feel the eyes of the crowd boring into him, yet within that intensity, he also sensed an unspoken alliance forming. He was navigating uncharted territory, where every word carried the weight of potential salvation or utter collapse. Listen, he shouted, pushing through the din of uncertainty. We all have our battles, and right now fear is winning, but we can choose to stand against it together. The challenge in his voice wasn't just for them, it was a plea to himself as well. The stakes were too high, and the last thing he needed was to falter in front of those who were desperately seeking a way out of their darkness. The man in the back hesitated further, the weapon gradually lowering as if the very act of vulnerability was beginning to anchor him. Jake peered deeper into the man's features. Was that the glimmer of regret clouding his eyes? An opportunity lay before him, one that could tip the balance completely, igniting a spark of hope within the crowd. Tell us your story, Jake urged, lowering his voice to a more intimate tone. You don't have to bear it alone. We're listening. For a fleeting moment, the room lingered in silence, the atmosphere pregnant with possibility. Jake's heartbeat mirrored the pulse of the audience as they collectively waited for the man's response. He could sense the turmoil within, a complex blend of hesitation and the desire to be seen and heard. But then, the bitterness returned. Another voice, this one tinged with a deeper shade of hurt. You think a few words change anything? You don't know the first thing about our pain. Anger exploded from another man on the edge of the group, his stance rigid and bitter, a mirror for everyone's pent-up frustrations. Jake's instinct was to lash out, to counter that venom with his own sharpness, but he caught himself just in time. Anger wasn't the solution. It proved destructive, buried hope beneath piles of resentment. Instead, he chose to acknowledge the pain inherent in such words. "You're right." The admission quieted the room further. "I can't know exactly what you've experienced, but I do understand that pain can twist us into something unrecognizable." A heavy silence followed, like a gasp drawn before the plunge. In that pregnant pause, Jake could feel the pendulum of understanding swing. He wasn't there to fix their problems, but to help them confront the complexity of their existence together. He took a deep breath, centering himself. "It takes courage to open up," he continued. "It's not weakness, it's strength. All of us are whisked away in our trials, but I believe we can find light by sharing where we hurt, not hiding behind it." Before the hostility could resurface, Tom stepped forward, his shaky demeanor still evident but perhaps strengthened. "We're here," he said softly. "Not just for the valiant moments, but for the messiness of our lives. Listening doesn't mean agreeing. It means seeing each other." Jake nodded at Tom, grateful for the flicker of solidarity. They were both venturing into this unknown reality, but it felt like their combined courage was reigniting pathways for dialogue that had been choked out by despair. With the crowd teetering on the edge, Jake took yet another leap. "If you're carrying something heavy, let's lay it down together. Sharing the burden lightens the load. Who wants to step forward first?" He felt the heat of vulnerability boil beneath the surface, a call to arms but for emotional honesty. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, Jake could only hope that within someone lay a willingness to share their truth. The transformation of fear into connection was still possible, but the willingness to step forward would test the depths of their resolve. Would any of the men summon the courage to speak? He could hardly breathe, excited and terrified all at once. Insights were waiting to emerge just out of reach, and curiosity throbbed in his chest. He realized the answers lay in their vulnerabilities, perhaps intertwining in ways he had never even imagined. The atmosphere hovered thick with anticipation. Would anyone be brave enough to respond? Jake's pulse quickened. The silence was unbearable, yet it was also ripe with a sense of impending revelation. Each heartbeat echoed a question in his mind. Would someone take that leap of faith and pierce through the veil of fear that clung to them? The weight of the moment shifted, creating an invisible tension that only the crowd seemed to feel. Finally, a figure stepped forward. It was the man who had challenged Jake, their earlier heated exchange still lingering in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The man's face softened, morphed by an unseen force as he wrestled with his own vulnerability. Jake held his breath, fully aware of the fragile bridge they were building. "My name is Derek." The words emerged like shards of glass, raw and unpolished. "I was just a kid, you know. I thought life was going to be straightforward, until my father lost it." He swallowed hard, eyes flitting away as if embarrassed to look anyone in the eye. The crowd leaned in, attentively whispering among themselves. Jake noted how even the most hardened faces softened, their initial anger quieting to respect, as if paying homage to Derek's courage. "My dad drank too much. One night he yelled, 'Take her,' as if my mother was some possession he could barter with. I was scared." Derek continued, his voice cracking. "So scared that I didn't know who to save, her or myself." Jake noticed a collective tightening of jaws, as many felt the weight of shared experiences settling over them. It was a reminder that these wounds resonated deeper than Jake had dared to imagine. His chest tightened, but he refused to turn away from the emotional tide. "He hurt her." Derek's voice quaked as he laid bare the memories. "Then one day he hurt me too. I thought I could control how it would all end, but I was just a kid. I didn't know I could choose to speak up or to get help. Instead, I buried it all." Looking up now, there was fire amid the tears barely contained in his eyes. "Just like I've buried every ounce of anger I've held toward him." Jake felt the room breathe alongside Derek, an empathetic echo to his struggle. as if they were all unwitting guests to an intimate confession. It reminded Jake of the hidden burdens in his own past, the silent struggles he had kept locked away. Derek continued, "Hiding those feelings made me angry, and that anger turned to violence. It was easier to lash out than to look inside and deal with what hurt the most. But for the first time, I feel like I can let that go. Here." The crowd glimmered with fragments of shared understanding, a bridge being built upon the crumbled foundations of isolation. It struck Jake how Derek's revelation peeled back layers of sorrow, not just for himself, but for the others who could identify with such pain. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped closer, allowing the connection to deepen. "Derek, thank you for trusting us," he said softly, feeling the weight of that trust and its potential to heal. "You've given all of us permission to unpack our stories. What comes next may not be easy, but you've just ignited a possibility for deeper honesty." The moment lingered, shifting the energy from confrontation to communion. More individuals began to step forward, one after another, gradually letting go of their guarded facades. As Jake watched their stories unfurl like petals opening to sunlight, he felt both awe and trepidation. This was a process of transformation, and while he had helped ignite the initial spark, it was the vulnerability they all dared to show that held the real power. Carrying the weight of their pasts was no longer a solitary battle, but as the confessions continued flowing, a sense of urgency gripped Jake's heart. Each revelation was a catalyst for healing, yet they risked becoming too entrenched in vulnerability, without a clear path forward. What would they do with this newfound honesty? How could they translate these raw emotions into actionable change, not just for themselves, but for a better future? With unyielding determination, Jake realized the next step must come fast. This was just the beginning of a much greater challenge, and the time had come to transform vulnerability into strength, a potent force for change. "I can't help but wonder, how do we take what we've shared here today and turn it into something that can reshape our futures?" he asked, calling them not just to voice their struggles but to contemplate their next moves. He braced himself for the unpredictable tide of responses. Would they be ready to seize the possibility awaiting on the other side? Derek's words hung in the air, a powerful invitation that rattled the walls of Jake's resolve. He could feel the collective heartbeat of the crowd, a living entity ready to respond. But how? How could he steer this moment away from catharsis and toward concrete action? The flicker of doubt ignited questions he hadn't faced before, illuminating the shadows of his own contributions and shortcomings. Silence reigned as faces turned expectantly towards him. Jake took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he embraced the weight of their collective vulnerability. "We've shared so much today," he began, voice steady yet laced with urgency. "But facing our fears is just the start. What's crucial now is how we use this openness to build pathways for change." He paused, glancing at Derek, who nodded slightly, perhaps signaling his approval, or maybe encouraging Jake to push further. It was a reminder that they were all in this together, and together they could forge something meaningful. "I want each of you to think about what this honesty cost us in the past. What if we pooled our experiences together? What if we used this platform not just to share, but to strategize on how to reclaim control over our lives?" The looming question hung like the scent of rain in the air, charged with possibility. Jake watched as a few individuals whispered among themselves, the spark of potential igniting in their eyes. There was enthusiasm, mingled with hesitation, a teetering balance between hope and trepidation. He continued, fueled by a newfound gravity. "Imagine translating what we've uncovered today into workshops, support groups, ways to share our skills or navigate the systems that failed us. We could offer training, mentorship, even community outreach." The suggestion rippled through the crowd. Intrigued expressions began to replace momentary doubt. Yet Jake was acutely aware that the real task lay ahead in the specifics, the how, and it terrified him. Would they falter in their resolve as reality kicked in? He needed to tread carefully. "Let's crowdsource our talents. What can each of you bring to this table?" he urged. What if our stories became the foundation of a series of transformative initiatives? We all have different strengths. Maybe some of you are great with numbers. Maybe others have experience in conflict resolution or teaching. Jake's mind raced with possibilities. He shifted between excitement and anxiety as he scanned the crowd, searching for a sign of commitment. The energy had changed. It was now charged with the prospect of forging their identities anew, but there was still fear hovering in the corners. What if he was asking for more than they felt capable of giving? The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Derek, would you be willing to share more about your experiences in the face of conflict? Perhaps we could work together to create workshops focused on resilience and handling anger? Jake's voice rang with sincerity, opening a door for others to step through. Derek appeared stunned for a moment, then slowly nodded. If my pain can help someone else find their voice, I'd do it. Encouraged, Jake looked around, keen to ignite the flame of activity. But it can't just end here. We need to schedule that first meeting to lay out our ideas. Who's on board? A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, and a few hands rose slowly, tentative, yet unyielding. Jake's heart pounded as he felt the swell of momentum building. This was no longer just a session of confessions. It was an embryonic movement coalescing within them. But as anticipation surged, so too did the underlying questions. Could they sustain this energy? Would they be brave enough to confront the realities that lay ahead? In that moment he understood. Real change demanded more than vulnerability. It demanded tenacity, and it was about to be tested to its limits. Tomorrow we'll gather again to refine our vision. Bring your ideas, let's hold each other accountable, he announced, excitement mingling with anxiety, igniting the air with an almost electric enthusiasm. Yet, as they began to disperse with newfound purpose, a nagging thought pierced through Jake's triumph. What if the darkness each of them had battled returned to overshadow their efforts? The question loomed in Jake's mind. Were they truly prepared to confront their failures when the stakes became real? An unsung potential stood at the threshold, and it beckoned them into the unknown. Under the dim light of the bar, the pulsating energy of potential hung thick in the air. Each man felt the weight of vulnerability, but there was also a buoyancy, a newfound strength rising from the ashes of raw truth. As they congregated, exchanging ideas and projections for their futures, Jake was acutely aware of the metamorphosis that had swept over them all. This was not just a moment of clarity. It was a personal renaissance. Derek's willingness to confront his pain acted as a catalyst, shifting the entire narrative. It had transformed from mere emotional release to a powerful call for action, a rallying point that anchored every individual who dared to share. Let's brainstorm ideas that we can implement, Jake said, his voice steady yet energized, each syllable dripping with the conviction he had fought so hard to reclaim. They began sharing more than just grievances. Ideas flowed. Workshops on parenting strategies emerged. Mental health symposiums were discussed. Men's support circles were proposed. A burgeoning network of healing ignited by an atmosphere of authenticity. As enthusiasm built, Jake felt a deep sense of fulfillment surge within him. He was no longer the boy trapped in a cycle of fear and inaction. He was a leader, fostering a resurgence of accountability and unity among fractured souls. Everything he had endured was culminating into this singular moment of achievement. There was beauty in recognizing the potential in others, mirroring the transformative journey he himself had just begun. In small clusters, conversations crystallized into concrete plans. Documents were drafted, responsibility was divided, and schedules were marked. Jake stood back momentarily, watching with pride, as men with once hardened exterior began to relate their struggles to each other in tangible ways. Each exchange became a brushstroke on a blank canvas, painting a picture of revitalized purpose. Let's commit to meeting weekly. Accountability starts here, one man suggested, fervent eyes reflecting the fire rekindled in his spirit. Murmurs of agreement surged again, solidifying Jake's vision into action. They were ready to confront not just their pasts, but to reshape their destinies. This was the manifestation of a supportive ecosystem of shared stories and learned resilience. It was much more than a moment. It was a movement. Jake locked eyes with Derek, a mutual understanding surging between them. They had both voyaged from despair to hope, transformed by the vulnerability they had been drawn into. Gratefulness formed a knot in Jake's throat. He remembered a time when he felt utterly powerless, lost in the wake of his father's failures. It was that very bankruptcy that now underscored his current strength. He had finally replaced bitterness with purpose. As the night drew to a close, the buzz of excitement invaded the once somber atmosphere of the bar. Gratitude flooded through Jake as he observed men exchanging numbers and encouraging words of support. Here lay the heart of true transformation, a collective sense of belonging and accountability that no longer dwelled in chaos but had evolved into triumph. "Remember, we're fighting the same battle," Jake called, feeling invigorated. "This isn't just for us, it's for those who can't reach out yet. Let's honor our struggles by redefining our future." The group cheered and the warmth transformed the room, lifting spirits as remnants of past pain began to dissipate. Despite the challenges they would inevitably confront, Jake felt a surge of determination. They had already accomplished a monumental shift. Each man here had taken that crucial step away from isolation toward solidarity, a watershed moment supportive of individual and collective healing. As they filed out of the bar, Jake's earlier trepidation had been replaced by solid confidence. He raised his hand to acknowledge Derek, who had shifted from a haunted figure into a beacon of courage. With a smile, he realized this night marked not just an end, but a reassuring beginning. With this triumph came the recognition they all deserved, not just from one another but a profound acknowledgement of their individual journeys. They had proven that their histories didn't dictate their futures. They had begun conquering the haunting demons that lurked in the shadows. Jake's eyes gleamed with pride as he gazed at the horizon, envisioning a future brightened by resilience and community. It was a future where healing would intertwine with purpose, ensuring that the cycle of pain, abandonment, and neglect would cease to hold sway. As he stood firm, absorbed by the warmth of newfound friendships and shared goals, he realized he could finally embrace the man he had become. Not just a fractured soul striving for validation, but a leader with the strength to cultivate healing. "Before you leave, I have one urgency. If you're inspired by what transpired tonight and want to see more stories of transformation, you need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support for a channel filled with emotional revelations and journeys. Leave a like now to fuel the algorithm so more people can join this revolution of change. Comment below with your thoughts and theories about our journey because your voice matters. And don't forget to share this video immediately, with at least 5 friends who need to witness our victories. Let's keep this momentum alive and spread the fire of transformation far and wide." With that rallying cry, Jake stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, nourished by the knowledge that he was not alone. The narrative of his life had, indeed, taken a triumphant, resolute turn.